Kevin Moore is the imaginative storyteller behind Jack Kelly's captivating world and extraordinary paranormal adventures. His debut novel, The Book of Souls, earned praise as an Amazon editor's pick for best science fiction and fantasy and introduced readers to Kelly's mesmerizing abilities. With titles such as The Book of Souls, The Book of Demons, and Christmas Stories Volume 1 and 2, one thing Kevin certainly doesn't lack is range in his writing. Welcome to Uncorking a Story, Kevin.
Nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
I'm very happy to have you here, Kevin. I'm curious, where does your story as an author begin?
I guess I would say my story started, I grew up in New York City. So for anybody who's read the Book of Souls, they know that's where it's all set. Jack Kelly is right in this area of Gramercy Park, Kips Bay. So I grew up there as a kid, and I grew up in first in tenements, and then we lived in I think what they called the projects in those days. So there was a lot of stories around you, and for me, I had, like most people, had a little bit of a chaotic childhood, and so my escape was to just tap into stories, make stuff up. I might have overheard something on the bus, turn that into something completely different, but I never wrote it down. I just kind of like that was my way of coping with, I guess, the world. So yeah, and I went to Catholic school, so that was a whole different experience. And then hung out at the boys' club and after school, and always found solace in the library. So that's where everything started for me. It was just a way of I don't think when I was that young I thought, well, I'll be a writer because I couldn't spell. Spelling was always my, my Achilles heel. So I was like, well, I don't know how that's going to work out, but and you didn't have spell check or any of those things in those days.
That's right. Yeah.
You had the thesaurus and dictionaries. So yeah, I would
And
say
Sister
that's where
Mary
it started.
Mojo's red pen.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
So you knew you didn't know you were going to be a writer from a young age, but you were kind of drawn to it. You were drawn towards
Absolutely.
this idea of storytelling. So when you did grow up, what did you become when when you entered the adult world?
I don't know. I haven't grown up yet, so I'll let you know when that happens, Mike. No, what I started doing in my 20s out here in LA, because I came to LA and I was like, well, I've always been a storyteller. I think, I was a kid, my parents were a little worried that I might be a little bit of a BSer, so that, they were like, is that real? Like, and I always had this like great imagination. So I think I believed that I could see ghosts and tap into that kind of world, the supernatural. So when I got here in my 20s, I was like, well, you're in LA. Why don't you try writing screenplays? So I started to try and write screenplays and got an agent. And I used to do a lot of pitching, so that would like be storylines, and so I tried to do that in my 20s. But it's a very difficult business, as you well know. I mean, writing is not for the faint of heart. You've got to be you've got to really you've got to be a love. And I had some stuff that was almost, and then I got into real estate because I was like, okay, well, I didn't fit the starving artist because I came from working class people. My mother was a stay-at-home mom. My father was a construction worker with 5 kids, worked on the World Trade Center. So like, I didn't want to be like dollar, always going from paycheck to paycheck. I wasn't good as a waiter, although I did bartend. Um, I felt like the bartender had a lot more power than a waiter because you had the bar and you could cut people off from drinking. Uh, so yeah, so I did that, and then I got into real estate to supplement. And then I had kids. Like we were talking about kids a little earlier. You said you had kids. I had some children, and I had one that was autistic. So I dropped the writing for many, many years, and then I was like, it just was always there, like that muse that kept going. Well, let's write something. Let's do something. You've got these stories. Like, let's put them down.
Yeah, I mean, you could suppress it as much as you want, but at some point, it's going to want to come out.
Yeah.
It's gonna find its way out somehow. So, when did it find its way out for you?
As you can see, I don't dye my hair white. So it is, but I also went gray very early, like in my late 20s. I guess the genes started coming out. But, I would dabble and I wrote my first Christmas book, Christmas Stories, 7 original short stories, at a time in my life where I had just had my older brother, who I was very, very close to, passed away. And I was still in my 30s. And I wrote those stories to help with my own depression. And so then I started, like, just showing them around, and people were like, oh, these are good. There's something here. And but then I would say, really, I had like a big growth spurt in my 50s, because my daughter was old enough to live on her own, she graduated from college, became a psychologist, and I was like, okay, now I can go back to my first love, which was storytelling. And so I would say that's when I started writing about Jack Kelly.
Mhm.
And I just dragged my past with me.
I want to go back to, and I don't want to overlook what you mentioned about your brother, because we actually have that in common. I lost my brother about a year and a half ago, my older brother. And I also turned to writing as a way of processing my grief from his loss. And, I wrote a book called Visiting Hours for a solid year. And it's trying to sell it now. it's my agent is she's working overtime on trying to sell this one, but it really helped. I mean, both reading and writing during that period of time really helped. I started reading a lot of books around yeah, kind of you would put under the woo woo category, right? So, things about signs from the afterlife,
Yes.
and kind of what happens after we die. A lot of things on end of life dreams and visions that the dying experience, when they're transitioning from this world to the next.
Right.
And I started compiling all of these thoughts, and I put it into a fictional story. Um, but that really did help me kind of go through the process of grief, kind of revisiting. And in part of his story is kind of in this novel, although it's not his story, but it was really inspired by him. And yeah, I'm just pointing out that we have that in common, sort of turning to writing as a way of dealing with loss.
Well, a couple of things that you mentioned there that, like, I can totally relate to. Um, So I had a lot of death in my life. So my mother got sick when I was 14, died when I was 16, right before Christmas, which is why my Christmas stories are not saccharine. They're not, there's a lot of sweet stories in there. There's a lot of fun stories in there, but there's also reality of the Christmas season, and how, like, sometimes Christmas is like that catalyst that for some people it's always been joyful. And same with me. My parents were at their best during Christmas, maybe not other times of the year, but at Christmas time. And she died 2 days before Christmas. So it was always that kind of like, I love this season, I hate this season.
Yeah.
But what you're talking about with the woo woo is, um, the Book of Souls with Jack Kelly, is there's a lot of that. And there's a lot of the people that have passed on, because I'm a lucid dreamer. I don't know if you have those, where it's like I've had many, many dead people come to me in my dreams. And, I even seen psychics about it, and they were like, oh no, we think this is a gift. And I was like, I don't know, is it a gift, or is it something that, you know what I mean? Like, you're constantly, like, between yourself, you're like going, I want it to be true. Like, I had a cousin who I grew up with who died fairly young, in his late 40s, and he came to me in his dream. And him and I were just talking, and we were walking down the boardwalk in Jersey, and I said to him, oh, Mike, you're dead.
Yeah.
And he said, yeah, I know. And then I said, do you ever go visit your family, your wife and your kids? And he goes, I do, but I don't let them know I'm there because I don't want to scare them. So all of those things, like you're talking about, like, the afterlife, the spiritual part of it. I can't wait to read your book, The Visiting Hours, because if there's stuff like that in it,
Oh yeah.
that resonates so much with me because I I've had so many people, I've lost my mother, my father, two brothers, a sister, my two closest cousins. I'm not bad luck, but it seems like, you know what I mean?
Well,
Like my two best friends in high school both died young. So I've always kind of reached out to that part of my life, like what does come next?
yeah.
What is after this? And I think sometimes people ghosts are stuck in the in between, you know, um, and that's like some people are like ghosts, that's ridiculous, and some people are afraid of them. And I'm kind of neutral. I'm like, I kind of believe in ghosts. I mean, I write about them. They come visit me, but is it my brain just triggering the response of loss, of wanting them again, of wanting to sit down with them again, or is it real, or are they making contact with you in some way?
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll look forward to reading your book when it comes out.
Yeah, I don't have your body count of
Yeah,
people, but I have lost. I lost my mother this past year, my brother the year before, my mother-in-law was behind that, and I was with all three of them. I was with them during their final moments,
yeah,
and I think there's a bond that happens there, and particularly with my brother. Um, his final moments were not easy. He died of lung cancer.
yeah,
And he had a big burst of energy right beforehand, and then he goes limp. And I know that because I was trying to hold him up. And
yeah,
the term dead weight is a real thing. Like it is a
yeah,
real thing. But he, every now and then I'll get a very lucid dream about him. I remember one night, this was back right after he passed away. I was on a Zoom call, but not right after, probably a month or 2 months after. I was on a Zoom call with a prospective buyer for his store. He ran a wine store in Connecticut, and I'm trying to help his wife, my sister in law, sell the property. So I'm on this Zoom call, and during that call, I hear something walking up my stairs. So in my studio at home is above my garage, and there's wooden stairs that lead up to it. I'm like pointing to them over here right now. And I hear something walking up the stairs, and I think it's my wife. The only two people in the house are me and my wife. At the time, my three kids were in college. And I'm like, Nicole, can you just give me some privacy?
yeah,
And no response.
yeah.
And then after the call, I go into the family room, and my wife is passed out on the couch, like sound asleep, like out cold. I go back upstairs, and I'm talking to my sister-in-law. We're like regrouping afterwards. And I'm like, Carolyn, the strangest thing just happened. I heard the sound of somebody walking up the stairs right when we were having that call. And she's like, oh, that was probably Greg. Greg was my brother. Just kind of joking, laughing it off. Well, that night I have one of the most vivid dreams I ever have. It's me. I'm me, and I see my brother, and I know he's passed away. And I'm like, dude, what are you doing? Like, you're dead. And he's like, yeah, I know. And then he just blows into my mouth, right? He just blows into my mouth. And then I'm walking in the dream, and I run into my nieces, so his daughters. And they come running up to me saying, Daddy, Daddy, Daddy. And I'm like, okay, this is getting spooky. And then in the dream, I take my phone out of my pocket and I try to take a selfie, and it's my brother's face on the screen.
Oh wow, I love it.
And that's one of many very vivid dreams I've had about him since he passed away. Now, my mother doesn't bless me with those dreams.
Yeah.
She just sends music my way sometimes. She's done
Well,
some freaky stuff for
they
my dad.
communicate in very different ways, don't you think? I
Yeah,
mean, because
yeah,
I think you and I are on the same thing. We are believers, and that we could connect with the dead in some way. They're trying to connect with us, and I've had so many stories like that. Like I dream about my brothers a lot. I had two of them, and they pop in and out um, for different reasons. But I actually wrote an article about it called "Have you ever had a supernatural experience?" And it was my younger sister, who we used to call the tea lady, TEA, because she loved tea. My wife and I used to always, on her birthday, we would take her to a tea house or buy her teacups or, teapots. Everything was surrounding tea. And so she passed away unexpectedly, um, about 7 years ago, and she kept coming to me in my dreams. Now, her and her daughter were estranged at the time. They were having a very difficult time in their lives when Ellen died, and so she kept coming into my dreams, and I would say, why haven't you passed over? Because it was clear to me, like from all the dreams, that she hadn't quite passed over. And she said, I still have some work to do here. I'm not done. And because I said, did you see mom? Did you see dad? Did you see Mike? And, and she just kept saying, I'm not done over here yet. And, so I was, extremely sad about, obviously, I was devastated. We were very close when we were kids. She was my younger sister, 2 years younger than me. And so I'm in a yoga class one day, and I'm feeling really depressed and sorrow. And I walk out, and I'm in this gigantic parking lot, and I'm getting in my car, and I look, and there's something on the hood of my car. And so I get back out, and it's a teapot. And I just was like, it was such a trip. And not only was it a teapot, I don't know if you could see this. I kept it. It was a Hello Kitty teapot. And she used to decorate her daughter's room with Hello Kitty stuff. And it was such a trip because I could not, every thought was just about her, and she kept coming in my dreams. And I was like, no, I'm not saying that she, as a ghost, came and put the teapot on my car, but I'm like, there's 1,000 cars in this parking lot. Whoever picked this teapot up and put it on my car, there's a connection there. So you could see it as something supernatural, or people could go, it's a coincidence. Well, it's a very interesting coincidence, but it's also, I think, the way people that have passed on try to reach us, because they can't just call us on the phone. Yeah. Although you got pictures on the phone.
But you know what's fascinating? So my dad, I promise we'll start talking books again, but I think this is just fascinating stuff. So my mother just passed away in July of this year. Exactly 1 year and 1 month to the date my brother passed away. She really never recovered from his passing. We always say mom died of a broken heart, and she did die of like heart disease. And she was 99. She was about to be 91 years old. She was with my father for 67 years.
Wow.
Before she passed away. So they were very, very tight. Mm-hmm. And my dad's struggling with it now. He's 92. He lives alone still. He's down in Florida. We're all up here in the New York area. So he goes out to dinner a few times a week with his friends, and he's meeting his friends, the Sullivans, for dinner. So he's running late. He got caught at the bridge, which is a thing in South Florida. And he always laments getting caught at the bridge because he just gets all pissed off about this stuff. Anyway, so he's late. So he goes there, and he talks to the hostess at this restaurant, and he's like, hey, I'm here, Sullivan, party of 3. And she's like, we only have 1 party of 3, and it's under the name Arlene. Now, that was my mother's name. So he's like, take me to that table. And she takes him to that table, and sure enough, his friends, the Sullivans, are sitting at that table. And my dad's like, why did you put the name under Arlene? I find that to be kind of strange. They're like, we just walked in. We didn't have a reservation. They just brought us to a table. So now he's like, okay, well, maybe one of my kids is playing a joke on me. And I'm like, and that would have been me. Like, that's like, I'm the family jokester. And I'm like, I didn't do that. Like, that's diabolical. Like,
yeah. That's not a joke. That's cruel.
I have done a lot of things, but that's certainly not that. And my twin brother didn't do it. My sister, absolutely not. So like, that's just another one of these weirdo things, and I'm like, yeah, Dad, she's just looking out for you, and that's
See, I agree, but I agree with that. That's 100% for me, because, like, first of all, I love lucid dreaming, And I love when something, you can try and rationalize it, you can try and explain it. Um, I'll tell you, there's one other little story that just happened to us very, very recently. So my wife and I are upstairs, and we hear a big bang downstairs. And I like when it was like 5:30 in the morning, 5:38 in the morning. I'm like, what the hell was that? So I get up and I get a flashlight and I get an old hockey stick, and I go downstairs, and there's nothing there. So we have cameras all over the place because, as I told you earlier, I have an autistic child. So who's a, he's not a child anymore, but he's 30, going to be 35 years old. So, but we have cameras all over the house and all over the backyard because there were times where he was a runner. He's not anymore, but and so we played the video camera because we're like, what the was that? Excuse my language. What
That's all
was
right.
that noise? And we see in the kitchen this big shadow coming towards by the kitchen sink and cabinet. And then the minute I start to come in, you can hear me coming down like, hello, hello. The shadow moves back and is gone. Now, my wife is telling her friend this story. And now we both seen it. My daughter's seen it. We showed it to people. It was like a very weird thing. And I always go like the science. Okay, was there? It's 5:30, so there's no light. What was on the other side of the street? Was something coming in? We couldn't figure it out. It really looked ominous. So she's going to show her friend the tape from that 20 minutes is the only thing that's been erased.
Oh my gosh.
So we're like, you know, so believe what you want. That's what I say. But I love writing stories because these are things that have happened to me in life. You know, I mean, I use it. I use the stuff in the writing because it's, life is stranger than fiction.
Yeah.
And,
100%.
yeah. So there you go.
Well, you got some
What
dark
was your brother's name?
Greg.
Greg. My brother's name is Mike
Oh, there you go. All right. No, he was
and
Gregory
John.
Michael.
Mike and John.
Yeah. That's wild. Wild stuff. I'm worried
Yeah.
about that dark energy though in the house though. That's shadow monsters and stuff. That's
Well, the Book of Souls, there's shadows in the Book of Souls. They're the scary, creepy people, and they've come back from book 3, which will be out sometime in early 2025. I'm looking forward to it.
interesting. When I first read that title, The Book of Souls, I'm like, man, that was an Iron Maiden album from like 6 years ago.
My son-in-law said the same thing when we had the title. He goes, "That's one of my favorite Iron Maiden albums," and I was like, "Okay, good sign."
It's a later day one too. It's actually pretty good. There's one 20-minute song at the end of it. I'm like, they could never play this live.
Yeah, right. Like an opera.
So when does book 3 come out, and what's book 3 all about?
So book 3, so the Jack Kelly saga is like the Book of Souls, the Book of Demons, um, and this is named Pandora's Box and the Lost Boys. And so we meet Jack Kelly in the first book, where we actually meet him. He's a 47-year-old man with 3 kids, and he's married, and he's happily married. He has an accident and wakes up. He's a 13-year-old boy in 8th grade in Catholic school that has fallen through the floor in an old boarding house, a condemned boarding house. And when he wakes up, all the doctors are saying to him, "You're 13. You don't have kids. You're not married. That's all false memories from the injury to your brain." So, plus at that point, he's also realizes he can actually see ghosts and hear ghosts and has psychic abilities. And so that story starts off with, is there a family? Is there some time continuum? Is he just kind of a psychic kid with some issues? And the Book of Souls and the Book of Demons takes you through the ghosts, the shadow people, which and the one thing I always tell people is never be afraid of a ghost and never be afraid. It's like in psychology, if you like anything with Jung, right? It's like the shadow self. Like you have to deal with that in life. If you never deal with your shadow self, you're never going to know who you truly are. So So the Pandora's box is now Jack is because there's you had the Book of Souls, the Book of Demons, and then he starts off and he is a senior in high school. And he goes to, and it's a lot of different things, where the paintings, the original painting in the Book of Souls, uh, was supposed to be the self-portrait of the artist as a child with this shadow energy around him that he paints, this guy Casper Greenstreet. But he actually painted Jack in the painting because he's seen him in Madison Park as a little boy. And so this connection is there through the paintings, and Casper Greenstreet is the ghost that's across the street from the school. Jack and him go to war, basically. So Pandora's box takes Jack as a, now he's on the edge of 17. He's with a bunch of friends and he's on his way for a weekend trip in the cabin. And shit starts to happen. He's been sedating himself because of what's gone on in life with in the Book of Souls and the Book of Demons with friends of his that have he survives, but other people get damaged. So he's been trying to keep that energy away from himself. And he walks into this cabin and it's like, oh shit, all bets are off. There's an old camp, a closed camp there, and he connects with these ghosts that he calls the Lost Boys, and they're from different eras that went to that camp. And there's a lot of stuff going on in this book. I call it Pandora's Box because Casper Greenstreet also did these paintings called Pandora's Box, and one of them opens at this moment in the painting, in the real painting. So it's all of this kind of. I brought the last two books had ghosts, shadows, and shapeshifters. This book has ghosts, shadows, but in a different sense because now Jack has to use the shadows for his own power because he's coming against witches, ghosts, shapeshifters. It's just a fun ass weekend on a weekend trip with his high school buddies, and
Yeah,
everything goes wrong.
it sounds like a wild ride.
Yeah, I think it is. It is a wild ride.
When you conceived of this character and started the Book of Souls, what was your path to getting it published? How did you get it out into the world?
Well, so I went looking the old fashioned way. So I was like, let me go like I used to do. Let me get an agent. Let me try and look through the publishing world. And I thought about it and I looked into it. I did a lot of research and it was like, here's obviously the pluses, even because, the five big publishers are so difficult to get to, right? The gatekeepers there. But then there's all of these little publishers. And I dealt on a children's book with a traditional publisher, a very small publisher, hated it. It was like a very negative experience for me. So with this one, the Book of Souls, I was like, look, you've got so much time left, right? So I figure if I have 20 really good years, 25 really good years, I want people to see my writing. I want to tell this story, that's why I have all my books are in libraries because it was important to me as a kid to be able to go to the library and just rent a book because we weren't buying them. And so I decided I was going to self-publish, and I went with a company that I really like, that helped me, because I went to a professional. This is what I would suggest anybody, even if you're going to self-publish, get a good editor. So I found an editor that worked with me on the Book of Souls, the Book of Demons, and then was working with me on the last book, Pandora's Box and the Lost Boys. Very established, got great references. He ended up getting sick and dying during the last edit of
Oh my
this
gosh.
book. So anyway, so I got it edited and I just did it myself. I learned a lot of things the hard way. Well, You know what the funny thing is, Mike? Christmas Stories, 7 original short stories that I told you about that I started writing after my brother, and then I went back to it years, I don't know, maybe 30 years later, 25 years later, rewrote them because they were very, a publisher was looking at that book years ago when I had an agent, and he said, it's very lachrymose. And I was like, okay, so it's sad, which makes sense because I was bringing a lot of sad energy into the story. So I changed it around a little, made them uplifting. Um, where was I going with this? So anyway, yeah. So I just decided, and that book did so well. That little Christmas book has done so well comparatively. Like, when people tell me, they're like, oh my God, that's great. Um, People in the business. And so I just decided I wanted it out there. I wasn't sure it was going to be a series, to tell you the truth, because I wrote this long ass book. And one of the editors said to me, he goes, you've got 2 novels here. So we split them into the Book of Souls and the Book of Demons. And then he was like, you've got a series. And by the time I was finished with the second book, I thought, because then I had to break them up, which was a task. And then I was like, oh, okay, what do I do with this guy? Because I actually love this kid, Jack Kelly, because Jack Kelly is kind of me when I was a kid. As I told you, like I used to think I was contacting spirits and ghosts and everything like that. So I was like, okay, I can take that, make it real. I thought it was a paranormal spiritual story. Amazon picked it as an editor's pick, which was thrilling as sci-fi,
Hmm.
fantasy. And I realized this is like, I think as a writer, like you said, I write things that are very different, but I think as a writer, you feel like I don't want to be boxed in. And I've had people say to me, oh, no, you should stick to a genre. And I'm like, I don't want to stick to a genre. Like I've got stories, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Um,
that's a tough thing. I mean, I know a very popular thriller author who loves writing holiday rom-coms. But she's known for thrillers, like these best New York Times best-selling thrillers. So she has to write those under a different name. And that, I guess that kind of makes sense. You don't want to confuse your thriller audience with, the next Love Actually or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. If only, right?
Right.
Well, yeah, that's the
Yeah.
thing. My Christmas story is like, so I started writing this. Well, what happened was my wife said, why don't you write another thing of Christmas stories? And I was like, that's not easy to do, write a lot of short stories with the same, with a theme. And I was like, when I wrote that at a particular time in my life, so maybe I'll try and write one story and add it to that book and just redo it as 8 original short stories. And the Christmas stories started to like flow. And you and I were talking about this like earlier. I'm not like, I know a lot of people, and journaling is very big now, and it's very big in men's groups and all of that stuff. I'm not a journaler. I've never been able to write like a diary, but what I do is every single one of my characters is what I'm something is going on in my life at that moment that I'm writing about them. So that is where I do my journaling.
Yeah.
It's like in my fiction, but it's something I've experienced, something that's real. And then like speaking of genres, right? So I have another book that's going to be out in 2025 called Waking Sleeping Beauty. And it's a female detective story about 3 very different women in Los Angeles, and I call it a spiritual thriller. But like, it's probably not like they're like, well, what does this have to do with Christmas, or how is this paranormal or horror? But I do use lucid dreaming in the story, but I don't want to just you know that's not the way my brain works, and I feel like I've waited so long to really, really spend all my time writing that maybe I should switch to a different name. I just, I'm like, let me just write. And if
Yeah.
people like it and want to read it, great.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like it's in the same vein anyway, right? I mean, it's somewhat in the same vein as the Book of Souls, the Book of Demons, and the Pandora's Box and Lost Boys.
Yeah.
Um,
This is all spiritual.
yeah.
I mean, there's always spirituality floating in there, and what's real and what isn't. What I've realized the type of writer I am is maybe not a particular genre, but I do write fantasy, and I do write, like, I like wistful writing. Like I like it to be like Is it real? Is it not real?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it blurs the line a little bit between fantasy and non-fantasy. I mean, it might be fantasy to, let's say, non-believers,
Right.
but certainly maybe not fantasy to you and me.
Right. Exactly. I agree.
um, so one way I like to get to know my guests a little bit more is by asking a couple of pop culture questions.
Sure.
So Kevin, I'm curious, when you were growing up, back in those New York City days, did you have anything you used to watch on TV? Anything that you were drawn to?
Yeah, I liked Dark Shadows. There's a surprise. I liked the 4:30 movie, and I liked Batman.
The Adam West Batman?
Yes,
Yeah.
because I just like the characters that came through, and I think that's what's great about writing fantasy. It's like you got the Penguin one week, you got the Joker one week, you get Catwoman. It's we all live real life every day. It's
Yeah.
fun, but it's also real life.
I
So when you're
remember
writing or watching,
that series I used to watch with my brother, and it was so campy compared to like what Batman, well, I guess what Batman was like conceived of in the comics
right,
was very different than that 60s Adam West series versus also, what Batman has become on the big screen. I don't know how many Batman movies they've made, probably 10 over the last 30 years.
yeah.
Certainly very
And
different.
I think I might have seen all of them, but I like the dark one with he did. I think he did three Batmans.
Christian Bale.
Christian Bale.
Yeah, he was
That's my
good.
favorite Batmans.
He was good. He was
Yeah,
good.
he was
Although,
good. And they also had that director that did Oppenheimer,
yes, Christopher Nolan.
Christopher Nolan. Yeah. So yeah, you can't get better than that.
No, those are really good. Very solid movies. Very solid. Although I do have a little I hold a little love in my heart for the Michael Keaton one.
I like Michael
That
Keaton.
first one, I just love him as an actor, and
Me too.
I
He
will
could
die
do
on my
anything,
I will
right?
die on my sword saying Johnny Dangerously is one of the best movies ever made.
Yep. That's a fun movie. Yep.
um, how about music? What'd you like listening to growing up?
Well, fortunately, I was very lucky with music because my parents were big, like Sinatra, Nat King Cole, big band, Ella Fitzgerald kind of people. So I loved that music. But I was growing up in New York City where um, one of my brothers was into soul music. One of my brothers was into hard rock, like Led Zeppelin. So I loved like James Brown, Motown, Led Zeppelin, all of that stuff kind of resonated with me. And I didn't feel like you had to settle on, I mean, Marvin Gaye's album that came out, I think it was in 1969, Let's Get It On, was
Mhm.
like playing all over the streets. And I don't know if you remember, like they had like these little record players that had batteries in them. And so people would be playing stuff downstairs. So you were constantly exposed to different types of music, I mean, so fortunately for music, I loved it all. And I love movies. I mean, my favorite movie is the Godfather series.
Oh, well, we could say one and two, but
One
where do
and
you
two.
stand on three?
Yeah, one and two. Three is not in their league. It's unfortunate, but yeah, one and two. And when I went to see one, I was like probably not old enough to see that. My father took me and my older brother Mike, and I just was like, wow, this is an amazing movie. Like
Yeah.
this is like storytelling at its best,
No, just the character study of Michael Corleone. It's one of my favorite books ever written. And then the movie is almost flawless. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just so good. It's so
Yeah.
good. My wife has still never seen it, and she'll never watch it because she claims it's too long.
Oh,
I'm
wow.
like, I
Well,
got to see a couple years ago. They were doing, I guess it was a 50th anniversary during what is it? What's the big film festival? Tribeca Film Festival. So they had a theater up in Harlem, and they had Al Pacino there. He was being interviewed by some journalist who it was a very difficult interview to watch.
oh, really painful.
Pacino was not playing fair with this interviewer,
Um,
but they were both introduced by Robert De Niro. And I'm like, this was just one of the greatest nights of my life. Just going to that theater. I think I went alone. And seeing and then watching The Godfather on the big screen, and first time I'd ever seen it on a big screen. There are laughs in that movie that you don't get unless you're watching it with a theater full of people.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
because there's some humor in there that I
Yeah.
never picked up, but until I saw it with a group of people, it was wild. It was wild, but such a good film.
Well, we went this year. We did a trip to Iceland and Norway, and so flying back, we were flying back, and it's a 11-hour flight, I think, from Norway or something like that, and they had The Godfather on. Like I could rent it, like I didn't have to rent it. It was one of the movies to choose from, and I watched it again, and I just was like, wow, what a fucking great,
Yeah,
sorry,
yeah, it's
what
all
a
good.
great movie. What a great movie. You know what I mean? Like it's just like because it's a family film. It's a family movie. It's about a family, and that just happens to be their business. And it just was so good.
Yeah.
Um, so so we did music, we did television. Um, I think, well, I don't know how you are, if it was how old you were exactly, but do you remember when The Wizard of Oz used to come around once a year?
Once a year, yeah. If you missed
Once a
it, you were
year,
done.
right? And that was a big treat when you were a kid and eat all of those characters. And I don't know how true it is, but I read an article one time where they were saying that Baum wrote this, and could be BS, but it could be real, that each character represented something politically. Like the wizard was, I think was it Wilson, Woodrow Wilson, when he wrote the book, was a lame duck. So he had no real power. The scarecrow were the farmers, and they weren't using their brains to move their influence. Dorothy obviously was the everyday person. Um, the Tin Man was the Congress because he didn't have a heart. Like that was like sort of like the metaphors. I don't know. So I love using metaphors in my books too. Like even if nobody else is getting them, I'm like maybe somebody will get it,
Yeah.
But yeah, and those are a lot of things. But I think to tag a book, the first book that I really well, I of course I read Dr. Seuss and all of those. My mother was big on getting us books like that to help us start reading early, and Dr. Seuss and Winnie the Pooh and the Hardy Boys. But my favorite book, and I think you read it in second grade or third grade. I think it might have been third grade. Um, Flowers for Algernon.
Sure.
Right. I mean, that was the first time I had like empathy. I understood the characters, both the mouse and Charlie. And that was a book that made me really love to go to the library because you never knew what you're going to find.
Yeah. What if you could go back in time and offer the younger Kevin some words of advice? What would you tell your younger self?
What would I tell myself? I would tell myself um, that especially when I was younger, that I was much tougher, much stronger internally than I thought I was. That never let go of the imagination. It's super important. Um, and that, time may not heal all wounds, but, you know, it'll lessen, like the pain lessens. Um, and you learn to sort of, uh, it's almost like a sculpture. You learn to like twist it into other things, like rather than just remember the pain of the moment, the pain of those things, the joy of the person. Like we both were talking about the people that we've lost, that we've loved, right? It's like if you just live in that pain for the rest of your life, you're missing the beautiful smiles, the jokes, the laughs, the fun, getting in trouble with your brothers, like those things that are make life worth living.
Yeah, you got to remember the good times and be thankful for the time you had with them and the blessings that their lives were. I agree.
No matter how short.
No matter how short. Well, Kevin, this has been a fun conversation. I'm curious if people wanted to learn more about you. Do you have a website or social media that you're active on?
Yes, I have a website. It's called kevinmoorepublishing.com. You could actually send me text through there if you want to invite me to a book club. I've done those with people. I love doing them because it's so great to interact with somebody and they go, well, why did you use this? Or why did you do that? I'm also on Facebook, kevinmoorepublishing.com again. I'm on Instagram, Kevin Moore. And I am at More Books 59 at gmail.com if you want to send me a text.
Oh, there you go.
I love to interact with people that read, even if they have questions about my my approach.
Fair enough. Well, I'll be sure to put all of that in our show notes. And Kevin, I will say thank you for stopping by Uncorking a Story and letting me uncork yours.
Thank you, Mike. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Uncorking a Story. If you'd like more information about today's guest or to find out more about Mike, go to uncorkingastory.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review us at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Tune in every week to hear Mike Carlon uncork a new story.